welcome to NewsX conversation with Manish Tewari, former INB minister and also a Lok Sabha MP from the Congress. Manish, welcome to this conversation. We're having a chat at a time when there's a lot of focus on the media, in fact, which is why I want you to wear a former INB minister's hat for this conversation. We've been accused of fake TRP scams. We've been accused of toxic TV. We've had, the whole conversation around this country, I think, is at the moment very polarized. So first, I'd like you to begin with the TRP scam. How are TRPs measured? What are the various agencies? There was first STAM, then BARC. If you can just break this down for our viewers first, and then we'll go on to what the scam is all about.
Thank you very much, Priya, for having me on your show. It's always a pleasure talking to you, having a civilized conversation in these polarized times. And I must congratulate you for keeping this tradition of a non-adversarial conversation in place when the pressure, as you rightly pointed out in these polarized times, is completely to the contrary. To begin with television rating points, television rating points has been a mug's game to begin with. TRPs started being generated around 1996. This is about 4 years after the broadcasting space was liberalized in India, and private players were allowed to enter the cable and satellite television market. Over a period of time, complaints about the method in which television rating points are generated kept appearing in the public space, and there were complaints to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. At various points in time, way back in 2006, if I recall correctly, the INB ministry made a reference to the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. They gave a very concrete set of recommendations. Unfortunately, they were not actioned. In 2008, TRAI again reiterated those recommendations. Then you had an Amit Mitra committee, which went into the entire gamut of television rating points. And then finally, in 2012, TRAI again sent back a set of recommendations that this system needs to be fixed because it is completely faulty. When I became INB minister in October 2012, a large number of television channels, especially free-to-air channels, came and complained about two things. Essentially, one is the exorbitant amount of carriage fees, which news and current affairs channels have to pay in order to be visible to the MSOs. And number two was this entire system of TRPs on which rides a 40,000 crore advertising paradigm. Subsequently, I made a re-reference to the TRAI in 2012, and they answered in 2013. In fact, Mr. Rahul Kullar, when he answered the reference in the November of 2013, virtually threatened me in writing that if I were not to act in 2 months, the TRAI would step in. And then on the 9th of January 2014, I, with the approval of the Union Cabinet, put an entire policy framework in place whereby television rating agencies would have to follow a certain set of rules in order to generate TRPs. Those essentially involved declaring their stakeholding pattern, because there were lots of allegations with regard to conflicts of interest, etc. Subsequently, TAM challenged that in the Delhi High Court, and two of those recommendations were stayed, but the rest were upheld. And finally, for reasons best known to them, TAM decided to exit the business. I think possibly they were not very comfortable, if I recall correctly, really revealing their shareholding patterns, etc. One of the recommendations which the TRAI had made constantly was that there should be an industry-led body which should generate television rating points. And this was the Broadcast Audience Research Council, which was supposed to consist of advertisers, television channels, and other stakeholders of the media industry. The idea was that you would have an industry-led body and you would have 3 or 4 private players. And that would really act as a check and balance on each other. So therefore, there would be some method of cross-verifying as to what really is the reality of the marketplace. But unfortunately, with TAM's exit and when BARC came into existence, post my tenure in the INB ministry, I think Mr. Javadekar or late Mr. Arun Jaitley were the ministers then. It became the only body in the market. And if I am instructed correctly, essentially BARC, rather than making those investments which were required in order to install people's meters and the infrastructure around the country, ostensibly co-opted the infrastructure of TAM itself, the people's meters, which at that point in time were about 25,000 in numbers. Now, the difficulty is that the system that we were trying to fix, which was broken according to stakeholders of the media industry, continues to remain broken, primarily because there is a monopoly in the market. There is only one agency, whether it is industry-led or it is private, which is generating these ratings. And fixing TRP meters is the worst kept secret of the media industry. In fact, if I recall correctly, at one point in time, we had received a complaint that the TRP of English business news channels, and I think there were 3 or 4 of them only, were measured by only 3 people's meters. And all those 3 people's meters were in Dharavi. So it's been a mug's game. And essentially, it provides a trigger for the industry to be able to clean up their act. Essentially, because you cannot have the viewership of 900 million people, that is 193 million cable and satellite television homes, being decided by 40,000 people's meters alone.
Yeah, that's the figure I wanted to bring out. For I also found that for 20 crore TV sets, which makes it about 84 crore viewers, there are only 44,000 households that have people meters, and out of these, only 700 are for English channels. So at least it's a climb up from 3, but only 700 English meters, and that's what the people's meters, and that's what the fuss is all about in terms of the current crisis.
You see, there is another more serious problem, Priya, and the more serious problem is with regard to revenue models in the broadcasting space. In fact, one of the most corrosive legacies of liberalization has been the manner in which we have distributed television licenses like toffee, going all the way back to 1992. I think at the last count, there were 891 television channels, out of which 400 odd are news and current affairs channels. And if I were to extrapolate from a figure of 2012, which one of the leading majors in the industry had given to me during a briefing, and this was a TAM figure, that 93% of the people do not watch news channels. Only 7% of the people watch news channels. And so therefore you have 400 odd news and current affairs channels kicking around in 7% of the space trying to make money. And therefore you have a dog-eat-dog market. And primarily you have this sensationalization or the entertainmentization of content, because that is the only way that you will grab eyeballs. You see, globally, the revenue model is 60% subscription and 40% advertising. In India, it is 100% advertising. So therefore, till the time you don't grab eyeballs, which are measured by a faulty rigged currency called television rating points, which are generated by dodgy meters, you are not going to get the money to run your television channel, because at the end of the day, like any other business, media is also a business. So therefore, I think this provides an opportunity. In fact, the INB ministry, when I was minister, we tried to help out with the whole process of digitizing the entire broadcasting space in order to create more bandwidth so that carriage fee, etc., can come down. But I think the industry really did not measure up to the initiatives that we had taken at that point in time. And therefore, this is an opportunity when the industry can really measure up and clean up their act. I think they owe it to themselves, and they owe it to public interest and people who have trust in what they put out as content.
I've also been discussing this with various people. There are two suggestions which I like to run by you. One is, of course, that you have a paywall and, you become a channel where you actually get your subscribers to pay for you. The second is that, the ownership should actually say on the ticker, this channel is owned by X, Y, and Z. So you know that where the news is coming from. Because today, the way it is, most channels are owned by corporate interests, by corporate houses.
Well, you're essentially right. And I think both need to be actioned for the simple reason that first and foremost, the revenue models have to be corrected. And there, as much as television channels or the broadcasting industry is at fault, I think people are also at fault. We do not want to pay for the content that we consume. So therefore, you require a change in behavior patterns whereby people start paying for the content which they consume. Now, what will happen is that, let's suppose I subscribe to 500 news channels.
Yeah.
If I start paying a proper amount of money, I may probably bring it down to 50 or 25. But then those 25 channels which I watch, which could be a mix of entertainment, sports, news, etc., I would be getting quality content, and similarly in the print space, this is not only limited to broadcasting. This is the problem in the social media space also. I mean, for the life of me, why should I really subscribe to 10 newspapers? If there's a good newspaper which prices itself properly, and I get the entire panoply of my news feed from that one newspaper, and maybe I look at 10 news channels and maybe subscribe to 5 or 8 odd social media outlets, I think I am fairly done. But that will only happen if the industry, rather than undercutting each other, actually starts putting paywalls or starts asking subscribers to pay the proper price which goes into the production of that particular entity, whether it's a newspaper or it's a broadcasting channel or it is a social media outlet. So the problem is both ways. Insofar as disclosing corporate holdings are concerned, now this is the subject of a larger debate. One of the biggest media owners in this country had come to see me when I was the information and broadcasting minister. And he gave a 3-hour presentation to all our officers also. And his essential point was, and at that point in time, cross-holding of media was under discussion. TRAI had not made its recommendations, which incidentally have not been actioned upon by this government for the last 6 years. But be that as it may, the point that that gentleman made to me was that if you look at the top 20 media companies in the country, the market cap of all Indian media companies put together is equivalent to the 20th largest media conglomerate in the world. So if you really want the media industry to grow, then these caps on vertical and horizontal shareholding should not really be there. Now that's a very strong argument. But on the other hand, in the absence of a transparent declaration as to who is the corporate owner of that particular channel or distribution platform, because if content is king, distribution is God in the broadcasting business. So till the time those disclosures are not transparently made, I think the quality of news would always remain, or the quality of content would always remain slanted because of corporate interests.
This is where I want to also bring in the thing on the revenue model being as it is today, which is why, the government of the day, whichever, whether let's not, go into BJP Congress, whichever the government of the day is, has a hold over the media because they are providing a bulk of our revenues via ads. Similarly, so do corporates. Now I'm seeing a very interesting turn of events in the current times. We have Bajaj, we have Parle Biscuits, we have a few corporates saying that trying to control or trying to, say that we don't want this kind of some of the agendas. We don't want to sponsor hate shows. We don't want to sponsor toxic TV. So can they be used as a moral barometer to try and control the content? Because otherwise, with the government sponsoring the content, will always be in favor of the ruling party of the day.
Which is not really true, Priya. I'll give you a very interesting anecdote. In the November of 2012, a couple of days after I had taken over as INB minister, I asked the DAVP to do an audit that take the first 10 biggest media houses in the country and see as to how much of their advertising revenue actually comes from government, both government, union government, state government, and the public sector organizations. First of all, DAVP was extremely reluctant to do that exercise. They kept telling me that, most of these media companies are privately held, so therefore we do not have that information available in the public space. So finally, when I really came down hard on them and told them, get the information from these guys. After all, you give them so much of money in terms of advertising spend. Correct. And figures which they came out were quite interesting. So therefore, the union government or the union government only contributes 5% to the advertising budgets or the advertising revenues of the 10 biggest media houses in the country. If you put state governments and public sector organizations together, that figure only comes to 10%. First of all, I thought that DAVP was fudging. They were essentially thinking that the minister wants leverage over them. And so if we give them the correct figures, then he's going to really come down hard on us and say that obviously, leverage this. But that was not what my intent was. My intent was essentially to academically understand how the markets function. And then when I got those figures independently verified, in fact, one of the persons who did that verification exercise informally was your former colleague Pankaj Pachori, who was then communication advisor to the Prime Minister. Since he had been in the media space for a very, very long time, I requested him that you verify these figures. And he essentially also came to the same conclusion. So therefore, this myth that government through advertising has disproportionate control over media outlets is incorrect. But what government does is that it provides the bread and butter advertising of the print and the electronic media. When I talk about bread and butter advertising, it is your tender notices, your public notices, your various other routine stuff, which government does. And therefore, at that point in time, I had decided that we will put all this onto a portal and, and completely pull back on all this advertising. But then there was huge amount of resistance to that very idea because, most other ministries also did not want to give up what they thought they had as leverage. I mean, at some point in time, it will make the subject of a very interesting book if I do plan to write it. But
where is that book? I've been hearing.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense with the Lok Sabha constituency, it becomes a little difficult. But having said that, so therefore, to answer your question, corporate India has a really very big role to play. So if corporate India puts its foot down and said that we are not going to sponsor hate content, divisive content, polarizing content, and things which promote enmity and hatred in society, I think people would generally back off and clean up their act.
I don't know how they can do this. Maybe they can get together a body over the ad agencies and, try and figure out how to monitor content. But we've also had this recent thing where the corporate content is being monitored by the social media. I'm talking about the Tanishq ad. I think you've seen it, where, there is interfaith marriage, and there is, in fact, a Hindu girl who's married to a Muslim family, and the mother-in-law tries to do some customs for the Hindu family, which are, for a god bharai. And she, in turn, is actually, it was supposed to promote national integration, but, they were told their showroom in Gujarat was threatened. They had to actually take the ad off. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's absolutely a very, very sad reflection on the bigotry that has got internalized into our society. This is not about trolling a particular brand. This is about completely and absolutely demolishing the pluralistic and the secular idea of India. For example, there are a lot of people who were born to parents of different faiths. My mother was a Jat Sikh. My father was a Hindu. I am married to a Parsi. So therefore, there is a reality in this country that everybody does not get married in the same faith. And therefore, we try and bring up our children in the finest pluralistic traditions, respecting each other's faiths. I mean, I was brought up that way. I have tried to bring up my daughter in that manner. So what has happened with Tanishq is not about a brand. It's about the bigotry. It's about the majoritarianism. It's about the absolute abject xenophobia, which we are trying to instill in our society. And it is extremely unfortunate that people in the public space did not stand up and call out those goons who actually went after Tanishq. I think there was a point in time when interfaith harmony in this country was something that we were extremely proud of. And if somebody tries to subvert it, I'm afraid you're not playing with interfaith harmony. You are playing with the security of this country, because your greatest strength as a society is if you are cohesive, if you are well knit, if the minorities have this feeling that they are equal participants in the progress of this country and they are treated as equals. I mean, this kind of bigotry and the fact there has been no pushback and some jokers have been able to hijack the social media space is an abject lesson in what we have become as a country and a society over the past 6 years.
As you and I have had a conversation earlier, also social media is a two-edged sword. There's also another story of how Amul, I think, was named and shamed on social media for supporting a show on one of the TV channels. I think Sudarshan TV it was, where the show actually Bindas Bol showed a Muslim. It said that how Muslims have an edge in the IAS applications because they are given a little bit more leverage in times of admission. So the IAS is full of all Muslims, and that show was sponsored by Amul, and on social media campaign was carried on against this kind of bloodlust TV as they call it. And so there is the two ways of doing this also. It's just that I don't know what happened in Tanishq that they've been accused of calming down, but I think they're just going into what the mood is.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct, Priya. The fact is that that particular show on Sudarshan TV actually is now the subject matter of a list before the Supreme Court, and the court has taken cognizance on a petition which I think was filed by certain people, certain concerned citizens, and so therefore those are the kind of things which the Information and Broadcasting Ministry needs to act upon. You see, the thing is that in the cable television networks regulation rules, there is something called an advertising code and a programming code. Now, the advertising code and the programming code are an intrinsic part of the licensing conditions, which a television channel, or for that matter, any other media outlet, is supposed to follow. If you violate the program code, or if you violate the advertising code, your license ought to be cancelled. That is the inherent power that the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting has as a licensor. Unfortunately, the Information and Broadcasting Ministry has not been acting. And another thing which I think is equally important and which is neglected, see, the only private body which has statutory recognition in the Cable Television Networks Regulation Act is the Advertising Standards Council of India, ASCI. Now, ASCI has been found completely wanting. Look at the amount of surrogate alcohol ads which are there on television. Glenlivet books, Johnny Walker something. I mean, this is absolutely, either you allow people to advertise alcohol on television, right? In the sense, but this hypocritical surrogate advertising, this wink and nudge which ASCI does is completely and absolutely uncalled for. So therefore, what you have is a complete abdication by the by those people who are supposed to administer and police this particular space, and which is the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting.
Are you asking for more government control? I mean, that's not going to go down well.
Well, in the sense, I have always believed, Priya, and I've said this publicly ad nauseum, that self-regulation is a sham. It's a chimera. Till the time self-regulation is not embedded in statutory regulation, it has absolutely no meaning at all. And so therefore, all your industry bodies, whether it is the NBSA or it is the BCCC, I just gave you the example of ASCII. With great respect, I think they have completely and absolutely failed in their remit. So the time has come where you must actually have an overarching media regulatory authority of India, which looks at both content and the back end of the media industry, whether it is print, whether it is broadcasting, whether it is social media. A lot of people would argue that this would be a transgression on the freedom of speech and expression. But what goes on television channels today is certainly not freedom of speech and expression. I mean, it is actually gross vitriolic abuse which goes on, and also the trampling of rights of ordinary people. These media trials, the latest being Sushant Singh's case. I do not think this is the way any civilized society ought to function.
Manish, I agree with you, and I'm totally against this kind of TV. But what I find little disconcerting is a lot of people who say, "What you guys doing? Why are you showing Sushant Singh Rajput all the time?" are also up to date with all the twists and turns, innuendos, slanders that goes on. That means there is interest. So what do we do as media? I know we can, just stick to it and avoid it, but then we're also then losing out on the viewer interest. So it's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, so therefore, that's why I'm saying, if you have 60% of your revenues coming from subscription, you will not have to fall prey to this kind of salaciousness, if I may say. There is an intrinsic desire in every human being to possibly read what is sensational. I mean, after all, tabloid journalism has been as old as journalism itself. I mean, the Sun in England sells more than all the other newspapers put together. So there is a market for tabloid journalism. But that's a conscious call which news and current affairs channels have to take, which serious news publications have to take, that do they want to become tabloids whereby they cater to the most salacious and the basic instincts of people, or are they in the job to do serious journalism? And if they're in the job to do serious journalism, they won't be able to do it till the time they don't correct their revenue models.
Thank you, Manish, for this conversation, which I hope is score one for serious journalism, or at least explanatory journalism, because without being partisan, I think we've really explained what the problem is from someone who's been on the inside, who knows what we are facing and what are the regulations, and also some solutions that have come up also in this conversation. So thank you, Manish, for this. And thank you
very much, Priya. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and stay well in these COVID times.
Well, same to you. I see you in your constituency without a mask, Manish. I think I should tell you, be careful.
Thank you, Priya. Thank you very much.
Or rather, you are wearing the mask, but people around you are not. Let me correct myself.
Bye, Priya. Thank you.
Thanks, Manish.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.